all behaviour is safety-based. So there's different kinds of safety, though. For example, there's physical safety, there's mental safety, in other words, safety in your thinking. There's emotional safety, safety in your feelings. There's financial safety, there's sexual safety, there's spiritual safety. There's all different elements of safety. So when I say to a child, if you don't eat your vegetables, you won't get dessert, they don't translate that into a practical process. They translate that into, oh, you don't love me. First thing is that people pleasing is an adaptation to a feeling and an early life experience of approval and minimization. It's really important to really name it to tame it, understand it, but feel it to reveal it, to heal it.
Well, welcome to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of The Awakened Man and your host, Alan DeMonso. Do you feel guilty when you say no? What about being worried about what other people think or thinking of you? If your answer is yes to either of these questions, you might be a people pleaser. But being a people pleaser couldn't be all that bad, right? It's said that people pleasers can be pretty good at taking the temperature of a room and being able to fit into just about any situation. And if that's really not that bad of an idea. But today, my guest is going to really expand on this area. So we're going to start to unpack the nature of what people pleasing is all about, and maybe even get a few tips on what we can do to catch ourselves when we fall into this people pleaser mode. But before we get into all that, I just want to remind you to hit like, subscribe, and share on your favorite platforms so you can stay updated on our latest content, as well as helping me spread the Awakened Man message. And for that, I just want to say I'm truly grateful. So let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
As it's customary, I always like to ask a couple of questions to help us set the stage for our conversation today. So how much time do you spend worrying about what other people think about you? And if you're not sure about that, are you willing to find out? Or is that just a little bit too scary of a proposition? I think all of us can relate to having the tendency to be people pleasing from time to time. But what happens when this tendency turns into something more? The effect can have a devastating outcome on our lives. So guiding us today on this journey to unpack people pleasers is David Shinzensky. Now, David informs listeners about the art and science of interpersonal dynamics while offering insights into power and control. He helps to empower their inner world as they learn to navigate the terrain of personal and professional relationships. Having worked for 20 years as a trainer and a clinician in both government and the private sector, David equips each person with more confidence in their relationship journey. And he's the author of the Self-Awareness Method and Safe, Unsafe, Understanding Modern Relationships Field Guide. Welcome to the show, David. How are things today?
Thank you very much. They're absolutely awesome. It's a great day to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today, as it's a topic we really haven't dealt with here at The Awakened Man. And before we get into the topic, I always ask my guests this one opening question, and that's about, we spend a lot of time talking about everyone being on their own hero's journey or their own hero's quest. And so a question for you today, David, is how has your quest, your life shaped you, the times that you've come across that have been maybe more challenging than others, that have shaped you into the man that you are today and the work that you're doing?
Well, I agree 100% with what you're saying. I think that life circumstances certainly do shape us. I mean, I have a complex trauma journey. I don't mind sharing that. And out of that came a lot of resilience. And I chose career paths that were quite structured as a response to the complex trauma. So initially I joined the Army and spent 9 years in the Army, which really started to give me an understanding of human behaviour and power and control and how that actually operates, especially a thing we call conditioning. So how we can be conditioned into responses. And you know, when we're talking about people pleasing, we actually are talking about early life conditioning. So from the army, I became a private investigator, as you do. And 2 years of surveillance was quite boring, and, you know, 5 minutes of fun and the rest of the day was quite boring. So I decided to go into the helping professions, and navigating the journey from a military background to the helping professions was a complete kind of flip, you know, complete 360. And of course, I decided to do a career, or engage and embark on a career which wasn't very maths intensive. So rather than becoming a psychologist, I became a social worker. And in Australia, social work has a lot to do with therapy. So a lot of us are therapists. And I worked in mental health services for quite a long time as child and adolescent mental health specialist and a adult mental health specialist, and then embarked on my next journey as a private practitioner. And so that's when I really started to branch out and started to think about, okay, what really makes human beings tick? What makes us actually work? And fortunately or unfortunately, most of our behaviour is automatic. So today, you know, we can talk about how that progresses from our epigenetics all the way through the decisions we make, that we think often we're making consciously, but there's actually an underlying process that's going on inside our psyche that really is preconditioned into us often.
Well, for sure. And then we're definitely going to dive into that. And thank you so much for sharing your story. And, you know, the different field of experience you've had, you know, from the military and then moving into the helping professions is probably really helped shape the direction of your work. And so one of the first questions I have for you then is, what is really the root cause of people pleasing? And I think you might have touched on a little bit in there, but I wonder if we could dive a little bit more and get into what the root cause of people pleasing is, and if there really is one, and what is it, and what does it look like?
Well, what we want to really do is we want to deconstruct ourselves. And often we're taught that this is a very complicated process, but in actual fact, we all have what I would call a human operating system. And just like a computer, the human operating system, like the CMOS on the computer, there's basic functioning that every human being has. So the first part that we really want to dive into is, let's deconstruct that. So if I deconstruct every human being into a basic operating system, the first element is safety. All behavior is safety-based. So there's different kinds of safety, though. For example, there's physical safety. There's mental safety, in other words, safety in your thinking. There's emotional safety, safety in your feelings. There's financial safety. There's sexual safety. There's spiritual safety. There's all different elements of safety. So if we imagine our nervous system is encoded from the top of our head to the soles of our feet, our whole body, as Dr. Van der Kolk will tell us, holds the score or encodes memory. So literally we're encoded at the basic core, we're safety-based. So every behavior, if you ever want to think about it, like for example, in communication, in persuasion influence, for example, I know that communication is about creating a safe environment for the other person. So in that way, I get connection and I get trust. So our first element of people pleasing is really about, it's a safety behavior. It's a way of creating a safe environment for us. Also, we create in a way, or we perceive we create a safe environment for other. However, that may not necessarily be the case. So safety is our first primal driver, we're going to call it. Then we've got protection. We want to protect ourselves. Safety and protection. We're looking to protect ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, sexually, spiritually. And finally, procreation is the last part of our primal system. Having more kids, you know, creating, expanding the human family. So when you start to look at behavior as safety behavior, so if behavior, everyone wants a hell of a lot more of this and a hell of a lot less of that. So I want a hell of a lot more of happiness, and we want a hell of a lot less of pain. So the next part of the system is it's pain versus happiness. In other words, pleasure and pain. We move towards the pleasure, we move away from the pain. There's no such thing as cruel to be kind, because in actual fact, any time where we're hurt, we move away from the pain, or we kill or suppress the pain if it's an internal pain. Because the same part of the brain that processes physical pain processes emotional pain. So in actual fact, every time we're in emotional pain, we're actually almost like we're in physical pain. And so when we're people pleasing, it's what I call a relational adaptation. It's an adaptation to survival. That's it. That is people pleasing at its basic core. Then there's a large part of our behavior that's actually genetic. Some would say up to 60%. Mm. So not only are we encoded with a whole bunch of information, in our body and from our environment through our senses, we're also encoded with a thing called epigenetics. Now, you can all look up epigenetics online. We'll have Google these days. And epigenetics is, to really cut it short, we carry through feelings and experiences from our ancestors. So it's not just our hair color and our eye color. It's actually a survival adaptation. Because imagine if 3 generations grew up in a war zone. Well, the next generation really needs to understand how dangerous the war zone is and how to feel in that war zone. So there may be a real propensity for anxiety. There may be a real propensity for internal experiences that help us in survival. So epigenetics is like carrying through some habits as well. So you might wonder why certain people move towards alcohol or smoking or something like that. Some of that can be epigenetic. Some of that can be carried through. Epi means above the genome, so it's carried above the genome. So the genetic component is the first part. Then, of course, you've got this very complicated thing called attachment. So we actually start learning in the womb. So whatever's happening to mum, whatever chemicals she's producing, we're starting to encode that information in our system as to what life's going to be like outside. That's why we always say to mums, we want a stress-free pregnancy. You want as little stress as possible. So we're carrying through epigenetics, genetics, we're carrying through what's going on in the womb. And then when we finally are born, we're not tabula rasa or blank slate. We're actually coded with a whole bunch of data. And so then we've got attachment. In other words, how does our caregiver connect with us? Because our sense of self is actually created by what's reflected to us by others. When we're born, we don't have a sense of self. All we have is how other people treat us, how they reflect to us our worth or our not worth. So our first influences, of course, are our parents or our caregivers. And whatever's going on in their world, guess what? It's going on in ours. And we are attuned to reading facial expressions. We're attuned to picking up through our nervous system, through the appropriate, so the neuroception system. We're attuned, we call it the vibe. We're attuned to picking up the vibe of others, because it's survival. I've got to know how you're feeling in order to be okay. And so as a very small child, we're encoding all this data. And that's creating our sense of self because we're completely helpless. We need to know how to navigate this world to be safe so we don't die. And of course, we've got physical and emotional safety and mental safety. So we've got to navigate that as well. So, some would say we're not even thinking up until, for 18 months, we're not even having thoughts because we don't have language to language those thoughts, but we do have experiences. And those experiences I call them core impressions. So they're the impressions that we internalize. And this is the start of that journey of the people pleasing. It's already started to be encoded in us possibly. If mum or dad has anxiety, or that they model that behavior, because we don't learn by words, we learn by modeling. Words are the newest part of our development. So we mostly are learning by absorption of this information. And so then if we're seeing this behavior modeled by others, we'll start to adapt to that behavioral process and say, okay, does this work? Is it safe or unsafe? Now, if behavior works in the first instance, our unconscious mind encodes that as a win, and it'll start to repeat things that work. So the nervous system sees safety like this. What's safe is comfortable and predictable. Right? Comfortable and predictable. Actually, predictability is number one. Then comfortable. Unsafe is, of course, unpredictable and uncomfortable. But the nervous system will always take predictable over uncomfortable any day. So when I'm doing the dating, when I'm working with people, I'm teaching them how to connect in the dating world. I often get asked this question, David, why do I go out with the same person with a different face? And I say, well, there's two reasons. The first reason is it's predictable. Somewhere you've encoded that even though it's uncomfortable, it's better the devil you know in the unconscious. Yes. But also we encode our relationship choices between the ages of 5 and 8. So I'm going to call that a love map. We all have a love map.
Right.
And on that map is all this data. And we're actually reading for a person that fits our coding. And of course, people will have a propensity to go towards what was modeled to them, what they learned early. So there's really only two attachments. There's secure and insecure. So secure in the like we're talking 0 to 5 here. You know?
Yeah.
So secure is where we're basically, normalized in our emotional regulation. We're fairly resilient. We're able to say no. We're going to talk maybe more adult now, because we carry our childhood attachments into adulthood. They just get more complicated.
Right.
So, an adaptation in childhood might be quite simple, but an adaptation in adulthood might be quite complicated because, we've got a higher prefrontal function. Our prefrontal function is working as an adult, whereas as a child, it's not developed yet. In other words, our executive functions or our decision-making abilities, our emotional regulation abilities, our abilities to have ethics, our abilities to be okay in ourselves. Then you've got every other attachment is insecure. So a people-pleasing comes from an insecurity around safety. And so insecure attachment can look like a dismissal of a person, like push them away. So that's one kind of format of that attachment. But another format of the attachment is pull them close. Make sure I make them happy. Because if they're happy, I'm safe. So it's really about, again, that safety. So people pleaser, we call it there's 17 emotional drivers, and it's called the approval driver. So it's someone who seeks approval from others, seeks to create, they've got to be happy. Otherwise, you're unsafe. So therefore, you've got to make an attempt to make them happy, or at least find out why they're not. And often the person will say, what have I done? There's something I've done. And that's a very strong approval driver. It's an impression based on all that code. So that insecure attachment where we're trying to pull people close all the time is really to make us safe. And so finally, of course, you've got your environmental factors. So as you get older, you develop, you've got environmental factors that shape your behavior. But all behavior is an adaptation to whether your nervous system is safe or unsafe. Behavior is just adaptation. We follow the same adaptations due to predictability and patterns of behavior that formulate in our or subconscious mind. So at a conscious mind, like the controller, subconscious mind is where our habits and patterns are. Unconscious mind is literally where everything's coded. So it's a complicated question. However, it's about your safety. So what we've got to ask ourselves is, am I unsafe in this situation? Where is the threat? Is it physical? Is it mental? So if I send a text and I get nervous about that person getting back to me because they haven't got back to me within an hour, where's the threat? What am I predicting here? What am I putting out? Oh my God, is it that they don't like me? Is it they hate me? Have they not read the text? I've got to start analyzing my thought patterns, and I've got to start feeling my feelings, because there's three things that are critical. You've got to name it to tame it. Dr. Daniel Siegel will tell you that, yeah? You've got to feel it to reveal it to heal it. You must feel how you feel to overcome anxiety. If you keep suppressing it, pushing it down, it just accumulates, because there's a difference between feelings and emotion. Feelings are what's in the body. Feelings are the nervous system's way of telling you it's either pleasurable or painful, because the nervous system's binary. It's either this or this. It's the conscious mind that's more dynamic and it's more quantum. So you got to feel it to heal it, which means when the feeling comes up, rather than artificially regulating it with alcohol or drugs or other things like that to try and get rid of it, in other words, if it's painful, kill it, we've got to feel it. Because when we feel it, we build resilience to the feeling. We literally wire up that resilience in our neurology. When we kill it, we're telling the nervous system, we can't hack that feeling. We can't hack that level of pain. Therefore, next time that level of pain comes up, we respond quicker to kill it. And eventually our window of tolerance becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So if I'm out, and forgive me if I'm going on too much. Am I going on too much?
No, this is outstanding. Just keep going there, and we'll get.
Okay. So if I'm teaching one of my socially anxious guys today, now let's say that we're standing. Let's just pretend. This is just pretend. We're standing at the bar, and he sees someone that he really wants to talk to. Now, initially, he's going to have a feeling in his body of anxiety. He's going to be worried because his mind is saying, oh my God, what if I get rejected? What if this happens? What if that happens? What if the other thing happens? So that feeling of anxiety is really his nervous system saying, this is a threat. Mm-hmm. Talking to this new person is a threat, mainly because of judgment. He will be perceiving there'll be some judgment. Or she, I work with both. Now, the first thing that person's going to do if I'm not standing next to them is they're going to want to kill that pain. So where do they go? They go to the bar. They get the anesthetic alcohol. Now, that anesthetic, as he's drinking or she's drinking the anesthetic alcohol, it's killing the pain artificially, but the pain is still there. The pain, the fear of being rejected, that's never been dealt with while he's using or she's using the anesthetic. After 5 tequila slammers, the person's gone and he goes or she goes, oh, you know what? Oh, it's not worth it. It's too stressful. So they go home. Now, the next week when they start thinking about it, they only remember the stress. So the tolerance is actually wired, literally their tolerance is physically reduced because of using the artificial regulator. Now, the more we rely on an artificial regulator, we call it addiction. Just add more. The more I add, law of compounding effect in the nervous system, the better I feel. The better I feel, the easier it is. Problem is, it doesn't work like that. It's the law of minimal returns. The more I have, the worse it gets. Yeah. So in actual fact, we kind of trick ourselves into believing we're getting better when we're actually getting worse. Dr. John Arden, in his Mind, Brain, Gene book, will explain this really well, right? Yeah. So what's got to happen here? So I'm standing next to this person, but we're not going to ask them to approach that person. I'm going to take them away and I'm going to take them to the markets. I'm going to get them to talk to store owners. I'm going to give them 3 magic question protocol, advanced echo technique. I'm going to teach them how to read body language so they know how they're going. I'm going to teach them a whole bunch of skills. Now, in these skills, when they first go to practice these skills, I'm going to ask them to talk to 15 strangers. Now, when they start to talk to the first stranger, they're freaking out, but I don't let them have artificial painkiller. They've got to go through that pain. Yeah. They've got to ground themselves. They've got to challenge their cognition. They've got to say, you know, what's the worst thing that can happen here? There's no such thing as rejection. It's just that person's not the right person to talk to. It's pretty simple. Yeah. So they go through the first one. They're terribly nervous, but they get through it. No one's slapped in the face. No one's rejected. Nothing's happened that's bad. They've had a good 15-minute conversation. It's like, oh, wow. So the window of tolerance is now getting bigger. By the 15th person, they're feeling pretty good. By the 100th person, no problem. So confidence is not something that you get. Confidence, if you had to wait to be confident to do anything, you'd never do anything.
Yeah, no.
Confidence is repetition of that thing. doing it over and over and over and over and over again until you wire it up as a safe behavior.
Yeah.
Back to safety. So our people pleasers are in that boat of an insecure attachment where they've learned that safety comes from making others happy. There's a bit of a problem with that scenario, is that we can't actually do that because happiness is an internal process.
Yeah.
So often people pleasers will be very anxious. They'll be really anxious. They'll often have a lot of social anxiety. Most of my people with social anxiety have a people pleasing trait because it's an adaptation in childhood or an adaptation that they've learned to be safe. Okay, that's probably enough of that for now. What's your thoughts there?
That was outstanding, David. Outstanding. You know, we really took a deep dive on it, and that's what we're looking to do. And what I was making so many notes here, and when I go back to produce the podcast, I'm sure I'll have another 4 or 5 pages. But what was really resonating with what you were saying today is that this month with our men's group was our book of the month is No More Mr. Nice Guy. You know, and it's all about how really in the end, it's about how guys end up by being people pleasers. And because of what things have happened to us at a young age and how we were basically taught that we are not good as we are as boys. And then as we get older as men. And so we have this pain that we just haven't dealt with. And it's why we end up by choosing the partners that we choose and making the decisions in our career and our lives the way we do because of this other piece. And I didn't really make the connection of people pleasing and this book until I was listening to you do the describing the different scenarios and going, this is just totally synchronistic on what we're actually talking about this month, about how powerful that is, that piece of being a people pleaser is to us and how it can impact us. And so I really appreciate you doing that deep dive. Now, really, but what I didn't get from you is that this people pleasing really isn't then necessarily a mental illness, is it?
No, not. It's an adaptation.
Yeah.
Think of everything as an adaptation. A mental illness is really what we call an integration issue in the brain. In other words, parts of the brain aren't firing the way they're meant to fire. So we can actually encourage that firing by doing different exercises or doing different cognitive, somatic, bodily exercises, or certain medications can help with that too. People pleasing is an adaptation it's a survival mechanism. You see, empowerment is about choice. If I have choice, then do I need to people please? Right? Empowerment is about choice. I run these workshops called Personal Professional Empowerment, Relationship, Self-Defense. So it's emotional self-defense because traditionally, my generation, we're taught to suppress everything, but suppression is depression. Because a feeling is the nervous system's way of telling us something. If it's a good feeling, well, we like to feel that. Although if it's a bad feeling, we generally tend to suppress it. But the problem with feelings is emotion is energy and motion of the feeling. So we're actually not an infinite system. We're a finite system. In other words, we have a tolerance. We have a capacity to cope. So people pleasing is adaptation when someone's overwhelmed, someone's anxious, they're anxious about an outcome. So what they're going to do is they've learned that if we make person happy, well, then there's no conflict. There's no conflict, there's no threat. If there's no threat, my capacity to cope is intact.
Right.
Problem is, and I specialize in relational behavioral profiles. So let's say that I'm married to let's say I'm married to a certain lady who is on my profile, and she might be what we call a rejecter. So when she gets distressed, she rejects me. Now, if I in my profile, if rejection is my core vulnerability, then I am going to try to adapt to that behavior. I'm either going to try and please her to try and get her back, or I'm going to reject her as well. So two rejectors are doing this. A rejector and a pleaser is doing this too because they continue to be rejected. It's called push-pull or coquetting. So my real specialty is actually in relational adaptations.
Excellent.
So I have actually termed different styles of relational adaptions, and I call them coquetting. So in actual fact, the person who's rejecting me, okay, their coquetting style, because they're afraid of rejection. As soon as they get upset, they feel they're going to be rejected. They're afraid of abandonment. So they're afraid of abandonment. So in their life, they grew up in a way where they were abandoned, either physically, mentally, emotionally, in some way, shape, or form. And so they have this core of feeling a fear of vulnerability, of abandonment. They don't want to be abandoned. So they meet me, but when they reject me, I abandon them. Then you've got this cycle of behavior, and it's called a coquetting or a push-pull cycle. So all relationships are push-pull. So push means there's a threat, get away. Pull means pull you close, bring you in.
Right.
So in every relationship's on a spectrum, a bit like autism. It's all on a spectrum.
Sure.
So you've got a normal spectrum. So let's say my wife gets angry. That's a push. Now, let's say that I do the rock. So I weather that emotional storm. I acknowledge her feelings. And slowly that starts to pull her into me. So I get a pull. But what if I get angry and she gets angry? That's push-push.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't work. So different people will do different types of push-pull. So there are some people pleasers will do this, pull, 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 push. In other words, they'll keep trying to pull the person close, even if it's failing, even if that behavior is functionally not working. Or there's certain people who do push, 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 pull. They're our rejectors. So when they get distressed, they keep pushing you away, stonewalling, getting you out. And of course, if someone who's pushing is in relationship with someone who is pulling, then it's quite maladaptive in the way the relationship operates. So we have to learn as men to be able to navigate these processes, because I don't expect anyone else to navigate it. I've always got a choice. I've got a choice of whether I push, whether I pull, what way I go, because choice is empowerment. If I blame someone else from stuff, then I'm disempowered automatically. Oh, it's your fault. I'm disempowered. So what I've got to be in my world, this is just for me, is I've got to go, you know what? I'm making the choice here to push. I'm making the choice here to pull. I'm making the choice to repair the relationship, or I'm making the choice to maintain a neutral stance. I'm actually choosing my behavior. As I choose my behavior, I become empowered in that relationship. No one is doing it to me. It's just their adaptation to relationship that I'm dealing with. They're not doing it deliberately. They're doing it because they've adapted that way. And as soon as I'm doing a behavior that is maladaptive to their adaptation, they're going to keep doing that stuff. Relationships don't fail because we hate each other. We don't go and get married and we stand at the altar and say, well, you know, these are my vows, love. In 10 years' time, we're going to get divorced. We're going to have a horrible separation. We're going to fight over the kids. Yeah. We're going to do this. We're never going to talk to each other again. I do. We don't do that. No. We get together because a bunch of chemicals say, hey, wow, we're kind of connected right now. Over time, emotional refraction, Dr. Paul Ekman, means that we actually filter through how we feel. We filter everything through our feelings. Yeah. So if I'm constantly in pain and I'm looking at you, guess what? You're the source of my pain. That's how my nervous system sees it. If I'm looking at you and I'm feeling pleasure, you're the source of my pleasure. Attraction is how you make another person feel, literally. So in reality, as I am going through life and I am either feeling pleasure or pain, it's a push-pull. And the more someone pushes me away, the more pain I feel. The more pain I feel, the more I encode how dangerous the relationship is. Therefore, I start to separate from you. But it's my choice how I navigate that. If I have that choice, guess what? I need to have the information to do that.
Right.
But once I make that choice, I have empowerment. When I have empowerment, if I choose to please you, it's choice.
Right.
It's not done as an automatic behavioral response to threat. It's, you know what, I'm choosing that as a strategy. So then everything becomes strategy. Everything in my world is a strategy. So if I'm reading your body language, I'm reading your 26 signs of attraction. I'm going, yeah, right now you're quite connected to this. Is my wife. I'm reading that she's connected to me. I know I can approach her emotionally. But if I'm not reading any signs, in fact, I'm reading opposite signs that says, you know what, she's really unhappy with me, I'm not going to try and give her a hug.
Right.
So in reality, if I understand, if I can name it, I can tame it. If I can understand how the system works, I can basically, at that level, I can basically predetermine what I'm going to do, giving me more choice. If I have more choice, then I'm not the victim. I'm not the victim of all this stuff. I'm actually empowered to make my choices. And if I stuff it up, guess what? I got to own it.
Yes. Love that.
I got to own it. It's not your fault I did it. It's my choice, my decision. So people pleasing is an adaptation that we can overcome by understanding how it works and then choosing something different. And it's painful.
Yeah.
Because you've got to fight against that feeling that says there's a threat. But where's the threat? Where's the lion in the room? What's the worst thing that can happen? Someone doesn't talk to you? Someone doesn't want to know you? How many people in the world do you know that do that to you?
Yeah.
I have a saying, blessed are those without expectation, for they shall have no disappointment.
Yes.
So if I don't have an expectation of you, so if I text someone and I don't have an expectation of them getting back to me, so what? It's their choice, not mine.
Yeah. 100%.
And that's really how to start to navigate these behavioral adaptations that are painful. What's your thoughts?
I just love that. I just love that, especially the part about the expectations, right? Blessed are the ones that have no expectations. It's so true, because we do that, and when we forget that we have choice and that we can actually change the situation that we're in because we have choices. When we think that we don't, that we are choiceless, or we only have one, and we repeat the patterns of these subconscious patterns, and we end up by getting stuck and repeating and having the same types of relationships. And so, I totally get with what you're saying. But I wanted to go back, and I know you said that, really some of this root cause is really about having a sense of safety for us. But I'm also wondering, what kind of wound are people trying to cover up when they're doing people pleasing? So somehow we've got this feel that we're feeling unsafe. But is there potentially a particular wound that has brought that on, or is it made up of other things, other pieces from our from growing up?
Yeah, it is a complicated thing. A people pleasing behavior is really about approval. So somewhere in our life there was disapproval. So that would be the general wound. And disapproval means minimization. So in a family system, let's say that you're the middle child, an old middle child syndrome, which actually does exist.
Yeah.
You can people please so that you're not minimized. So let's say the older child appears to get, more attention, more love. Because I'm going to, again, go back to primal. This might sound horrible, but all relationships are about resources. Human beings are all seeking resources. Now, love technically is a resource. So when I say to a child, if you don't eat your vegetables, you won't get dessert, they don't translate that into a practical process. They translate that into, oh, you don't love me. Because it's a transaction. If you loved me, you'd eat your dessert. If you loved me, you'd eat your vegetables. That's how they translate it. So we have these things called transactional relationships. The transactional relationships mean if you don't please me, I don't love you. If you don't make me happy, I don't love you. Then I minimize you. And when I minimize you, that means you don't get the love. You don't get the resource of love that you need, because we all actually are seeking that resource, because that resource is ultimate safety. If you love me, you're going to protect me.
Absolutely.
If you love me, you're going to care for me. If you love me, you're going to hang around. You're not going to go anywhere. So that approval driver is about disapproval somehow, which translated into you don't love me. You're going to take a resource off me. You're going to minimize me. So in minimization, it's almost like getting kicked out of the tribe, or you're no longer worthy. You're no longer useful. in this family system or in this relationship system. So what we want to then do is realize that we are self-sufficient. This is the key. This is the cure. The cure is emotional self-sufficiency, cognitive self-sufficiency. I'm not talking about physical. We can be physically self-sufficient. But when we're people-pleasing, we're not emotionally self-sufficient. We rely on another's reflection of approval to be loved. Now, often people will get they'll get angry, they'll go, and then they'll reject. And then we get again a cycle of problems. So self-sufficiency means non-reactivity. It means I'm okay in me. I'm okay, you're okay. If you're not okay, that's your stuff. It's not my stuff, but I still love you.
Yeah.
I still care about you. Although, when you're having a little meltdown, that's nice. Well, I get it. 15 minutes is good. I can handle that. So in reality, my self-sufficiency becomes my best tool for survival in an approval world. Because what is approval? It's love. And do I have love? Of course I have love. There's plenty of reflections of love toward me. I've got to logically and rationally go out and analyze that. So in a fight, so let's say I'm having a fight with the wife, there's three things that are going to happen, okay? There's going to be a deletion, a distortion, and a generalization. So let's say she's angry. Now, this is literally how it'll work. I will read her face first. My amygdala, which actually stores all the angry little faces that I've ever seen in my life, generally, will see that face and go, there's a threat. Oh, my school teacher, when I was 5, I used to have this angry face. Oh, wow, therefore it's a threat. Therefore activate fight, flight, freeze, fold response system. In other words, threat response. So it'll be probably a fight system that'll activate. So I read the face, read the body language. It's all unconscious and instant. Read the face, read the body language. And before I know it, coming out of my mouth is, you're always angry at me. You never love me. Now, is that reality? Now, let's take that a step back. That's actually me going into my child brain. Me going back into my old child, my 5-year-old brain that is back in time, back in that place where I experienced that experience, yeah. So when you're people pleasing, you're actually going back in time. You're actually going back in time to when those impressions were formed, and you're reacting automatically to that stimulus without any prefrontal thinking. We've got to slow the process down and go, okay, let's stop here. Is that my mum? My wife's not my mum. Now, my mum disapproved of me a lot, and I used to have to please her a lot. But my wife isn't my mum. That's my wife. It's different. Yeah. So rather than saying, I'm always in trouble, you don't love me, I'm going to say, hey, babe, I get you're upset right now. Would you like a cup of tea? And that's a prefrontal function response. Now, when the problem is when someone is a threat, the first thing we do is we activate that old memory system, and it's unconscious. Okay, it's called implicit memory. It's like a feeling memory. And then the first thing we start to do is we start to delete all the data that doesn't fit with how we feel at the time. So if I'm reading, if she's angry and I'm starting to get upset, I'm now looking for anything that fits with how I feel. So there might be 10 things happening in that environment. 8 of them are positive and 2 of them are negative that fit with how I feel. And guess what I'm focusing on?
Yeah, those 2.
What fits with how I feel. And she's doing the same.
Yeah.
So literally, it's called emotional refraction. You guys can look it up. There's a book about it. Dr. Paul Ekman wrote it. I think it's called Emotions Revealed. It's a textbook. It's a good pillow. It's a hard pillow, but it explains this brilliantly, right? I'm just doing the very abridged version, yeah? So now I'm focused on finding the things that fit with my anger or whatever unhappy, sad feeling I got going on. Now, the second thing I'm going to do, so I'm not going to say, 10 minutes ago we were kissing and cuddling and we loved each other forever. Now she's the source of my pain. There's a positive refraction too. So when you date someone and you miss the red flags and they're a narcissist, guess what? Positive emotional refraction. So physically now I'm deleting good stuff. Second thing I'm doing is generalizing. So my language now becomes fitting kind of with the amygdala, fitting with that feeling. Oh, you never love me. You always treat me badly. So I start verbalizing the feeling state in a general way. Now, she actually processes language differently, and I'm not getting into that because that's interesting, but probably not for here. So literally now I'll start to distort. I'll create new memory based on how I feel, not based on reality. That's why the relationship fails. Because as we keep deleting, distorting, and generalizing over time based on the feelings and they're not good, guess what? We push a person away. We create a memory that is primarily not okay. We stop remembering the good stuff. So the people pleaser is also doing this. We're all doing this. Of course, they're feeling very, very, very much like they don't have any time for themselves, like they always give to others. They're always pleasing others, they're always trying to make others happy. And they'll say to me they'll actually say, David, I always make everyone else happy and I never look after myself. So that's the refractive experience they've got over the years. And then are they not now minimized? But who minimized them? They minimized themselves. So the cycle goes on.
Yes. Wow, that was outstanding, David. Just unbelievable. The great information on there to help us get a better understanding of what's actually going on in our relationships. Because how many of us, I'm listening to describe the story of being in an argument with your partner, and I found myself thinking, I was just in that like a couple of days ago, and those three things is exactly what was happening for both of us, and what a great perspective. And so that kind of leaves me thinking, one of the other things we talk a lot about in our men's work here is about how to set healthy boundaries. So how would boundary setting help a people pleaser and be able to transition themselves from being so much into that mode to freeing themselves a bit more? How would that look, and how does that work?
Boundary setting is extremely important. Boundary setting has rules, though. Do you know the rules to boundary setting?
Oh, tell us some of the rules.
There's rules for everything, right?
Absolutely.
It's a bit like Pirates of the Caribbean, yeah? It's a bit like we've got guidelines and we've got rules.
Yeah.
Now, Jeffrey Rush said they're not rules, they're guidelines. But the reality is there are rules to boundary setting. And the rules to boundary setting are thus. The first rule is that we have to make our boundary fair and doable. Fair and doable for us and for them. So this is actually a boundary. That's it, I'm leaving. That's a boundary. I'm never speaking to you again, one of my favorite ones. Now, if you speak to them again, what have you just done with your boundary?
Yeah, you violated it already.
Yeah, and what does that tell them about how effective you are at boundary setting and following through?
Yeah, not very.
So you've got to really start thinking about, okay, because a boundary is the line in the sand. There's limits and there's boundaries. Limits are flexible. You might say to a kid 20 times, something, please do that, don't do that. It's a limit, don't eat all the chocolate. But a boundary is when you have worked it every other way to change behavior and it's failed. You've been nice to them, you've been angry with them, you've set limits, you've moved into state, you've done everything you can to change your behavior. And behavior is really about cost-benefit analysis. So in other words, the benefit of the behavior for them is outweighing the cost for you. In other words, they get more out of it.
Yeah.
So in reality, people will keep doing a behavior if they're getting what they want out of it. Even if it's maladaptive, even if it's painful, they will keep doing it. So we set boundaries around that. Now, boundary has to be fair and doable for us. And it can't be invisible either. If you ever had an invisible boundary set on you, you ring a mate up and you say, hey, bro, how you going? He's, everything's good. You ring him every fortnight. And then one day he goes, I'm not speaking to you again, and slams the phone down. What's happened? We've crossed some invisible line that he's never told us about. So boundaries have to be fair and doable for you and for them. Boundaries have to be visible. You've got to tell the person where the line is.
Yeah.
Hey, buddy, I really don't accept that behavior. It's disrespectful and upsetting. If you continue to do this behavior, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah. And it's not an ultimatum. It's explaining the process of how you're feeling, what the issue is. The behavior must be labeled. The next thing that's the most critical thing is if you can't accept the boundary, accept the behavior. So many people will come to me and go, oh, David, they're doing this, 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 and this, and I hate it. And I say, if you set a boundary, I know I can't. They'll leave me. Well, accept the behavior. It ain't going to change just by you banging on about it. The bottom line is you've got to be able to accept the consequences of setting the boundary if you want the behavior to change, because the boundary is actually the way that you get the other person to start thinking about the consequences. Thinking about, is it worth doing this behavior? What am I going to lose? What am I going to gain? It's a very practical process. I know this seems very prescriptive, but behavior really is prescriptive.
For sure.
You know, on a certain day, I can walk into a place and I can read the room and say, oh, that person's with that person, that, you know, it's prescriptive.
Mm-hmm.
So at the bottom line is, with boundary setting, we've got to be able to accept the consequence of our boundary. And the last thing is never justify yourself. Oh, my God. You don't bang on. So when you set a boundary, it's short and it's sweet, and you have a boundary line, which I said one a little while ago. You don't keep going, oh, but I'm doing this because the more you talk about the boundary, the more the other person feels you're not sure about the boundary. It's like if you want to buy this phone. You know, I'm holding up a phone. It's an incredibly sucky phone, but I'm holding it up. Now, if you want to buy this phone, it's self-evident that you want it. In other words, you're just going to go and buy it. You don't need to be convinced to buy it because you want it. But what if a salesperson comes along and tries to convince you of the product, how good it is, and keeps banging on about it? Eventually, you're going to start to think, what's wrong with the product? Why are you trying to convince me? So when you justify yourself, guess what you're doing? You're convincing the other person of your reasons for doing it. In other words, you're not sure.
Right.
So I'm vegetarian, right? So when I go out with my mates and they all eat meat, I don't sit there and go, hey, bro, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do the other thing. And they're going to go, why are you trying to convince me? Aren't you sure of your position? I don't care. It's their choice. They do whatever they like.
Exactly.
So people do tend to try and justify their decisions. When we're setting boundaries, we don't. So the next thing is, with a person, you've got to actually identify the behavior first. That's the first thing you do with a person. So let's say there's phone aggression. So they're being aggressive on the phone. So the first thing I'm going to say to that person is, hey, I don't accept phone aggression. I'm going to label it. I don't accept that behavior. I'm not going to say don't do that. I'm just going to say I don't accept it. Second thing I'm going to do is tell them how I feel, but I'm only going to use 2 feeling words. They have to engage their empathy. I'm trying to engage their empathy. Now, some people are a little bit, on the narcissistic spectrum, and I can do a whole show on that easily. But at the end of the day, they might not have empathy, but I've got to gauge that. I've got to gauge where we are in this cost-benefit analysis. Is my boundary going to affect them enough that they're going to change their behavior or not? So I'm going to hit them with empathy. So I'm going to say, hey, I don't accept that behavior. It's disrespectful and upsetting. It's painful and it hurts my heart. It doesn't matter what, it's just got to be just 2 things. Mm-hmm. Then I'm going to hit them with a consequence. If you continue to do this, I'm going to hang up the phone. I'm not going to call you, but you can call me. Never close the door.
Right.
Never close the door. People go, oh, that's it. I'm never speaking to you again. Door closed. What if you have to speak to that person again for any reason? Where are you sitting now in the empowerment sphere? Yeah. You're firmly down the bottom and they're firmly up the top.
For sure.
So we don't close the door unless you have to, unless it's really serious. But generally, I'll leave the door open. I let them make the decision. Hey, you can make that decision, but just know that if you make that decision, I'm doing this. And I'm going to stick to what I say. So let's say, for example, because this is actually a true story. I did this around my father. He's a Vietnam vet, quite aggressive on the phone. And so when I say that boundary line, when I first repeat a boundary line, I usually repeat it 3 times. Hey, Dad, I don't accept phone aggression. It's disrespectful and upsetting. If you continue to be aggressive, I'm going to hang up the phone. You can call me, but I won't call you. Stop. No justification. Stop. It's a line. And you wait. Now, this is the day when we didn't have mobile phones, right? So holding the phone out here and he's going, you can hear it, yeah? Waiting for the response. Well, the response isn't positive, so I repeat the line again. 3rd time I repeat the line, Dad, I'm hanging up now, I hang up. I must now follow through with my consequence. I've told him I'm not going to ring him, but he can ring me. Door open. Now, how long was it before the old man rang me back? It was about 3 months. So 3 months later, he rings me back. Do I A, remind him of the boundary, or B, not remind him of the boundary? Well, guess what? I don't remind him of the boundary, because you only use the boundary when the behaviour is occurring. It's like if someone gets out of jail and you say, hey, do you remember why you went to jail, bro? You remember all those really bad things you're doing? But I've done the crime and I've done the time. Oh, no, you haven't, because I'm going to keep reminding you of it. So we only activate the boundary when the behaviour is occurring. So he's speaking to me normally on the phone, normal, and then suddenly starts getting angry. So that's my cue. Hey, Dad, don't accept phone aggression. It's disrespectful and upsetting. If you continue to be aggressive, I'm going to hang up the phone. You can call me. I won't call you. Now, I say it in that tone of voice. I say it as if it's another Tuesday or another Wednesday and I'm just having a conversation. Because he also reacts to the tone of my voice. Tonality is very important in communication. If he's angry, he's refracting. He's deleting, distorting, and generalizing. I am the source of his pain now, so I can't keep adding to that pain. It's called non-reactive behavior. The more non-reactive you are, the more it confuses the other person's nervous system, because you're no longer a threat. But if you react to them angrily or upsettedly, you are now justifying everything that they think about you. So especially in relationships with partners, we want to do non-reactive strategies, or playful funny or some other strategies, but non-reactive is critical. So, with anyone who you're setting a boundary around, you want to be as non-reactive as possible. You want to be responding, not reacting.
Right.
So I say it only once. So the second time I have to set this boundary, I say it once. You shouldn't have to repeat yourself. An old Aboriginal elder, a good mate of mine, Jappal, we were walking out bush one day, and he's a bush medicine guy. And he said to me, I don't know, I don't understand you. And he calls us wodulers, a white fella. I don't understand you guys, you wodulers. He says, why do you guys keep having to repeat yourself? We only say it once. And I'm thinking, I probably understand why people listen to you, and I get it, but you're right. If you have said it once and people aren't listening to you, well, then what's going to happen if you keep saying it? Nothing. So in the boundary, we set that line once. It was the best piece of advice that I got. I love that, because it was so well done, And so that's the once. Now I wait for the response. Dad's still angry. Okay, hang up the phone. Dad, I'm hanging up now. You got to say, hang up. Wait to see if he calls me back. Okay, about 6 months later, he calls me back. So I pick up the phone, talk normally. Dad starts getting angry, and I just start my boundary line. And what do you think he did? He goes, oh, you're going to hang up on me, aren't you? I said, well, you betcha, if you're aggressive. So now I can have a conversation.
Yeah.
Now we've moved past that initial point, because he's weighed up the relationship with his son versus being angry. He's determined that the relationship is worth keeping. Now, if he'd determined the relationship wasn't worth keeping, he'd just never contact me. And remember, I don't have expectation. So at the end of the day, if the old man doesn't contact me, it's his choice. I love him. I care about him, although he's made his choice.
Yeah.
If I'm a people pleaser, I'm going to ring him back. I'm going to keep trying to connect with him. Now, there's a really weird thing. It's called the law of scarcity in sales or in persuasion. In other words, the scarcer something is, the more you want it. So interestingly enough, the more that I don't connect, the more they connect. So using the law of scarcity in this context, The boundary does it really well because I'm saying, you know what, you can contact me when you feel like it. And if you're appropriate, we'll talk. If you're not appropriate, we won't. Doesn't mean I don't love you. Doesn't mean I don't care about you, because I do. It means your behavior is not appropriate.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's how to set a boundary.
Love that. Just love that. Wow, we have so much. We've talked about so much today, and you've just given us just a ton of fabulous information. And so I just want to think the one last question here before we head out is this: of everything that we've talked about, and maybe there's something we haven't touched on, what would be the one thing you'd want our listeners to take away from our conversation today about people pleasing?
I want them to take away a couple of things. The first thing is that people pleasing is an adaptation to a feeling and an early life experience of approval and minimization. So it's not something, it's not what you are. It's a behavioral response. Separate the person from the problem. You are a human being. Your behavior is an adaptation. So how do we change that adaptation? We have to challenge that adaptation. We have to feel those feelings and work through, feel the feeling, not act on the feeling. So when you get the text message, don't respond for an hour. Make sure you don't respond. Don't respond for 2 hours. Don't respond for 3 hours. I'm not saying don't respond at all, but feel the uncomfortability of not doing the people-pleasing behavior. Your mind will go crazy, your feelings will go crazy, but that's building resilience. If you can just push it out for a little while. So you say you're walking past someone in the morning, you say good morning, they say nothing back. People pleasers will often, first thought they'll have is, what have I done wrong? Is it me? So rather than going straight to their workstation, go, are you all right, buddy? Oh, I noticed you didn't talk to me this morning. Wait till lunchtime. Push it out, the feeling and the thoughts. Notice what happens in the body when you do that. Notice that as you start work, you start to forget about that. And then at lunchtime, when there's plenty of, you've had 4 hours, say to the person, hey, buddy, how you going? How was your day? And notice what happens. So it's really important to really name it to tame it, understand it, but feel it to reveal it, to heal it. And the last thing I want to say is it's always about choice. Everyone is empowered to make their choices. Some choices are crappy. If you have a gun to your head and someone says, give me all your money or I'll shoot you, well, you got some choices. You give them the money, maybe you survive. You don't give them the money, you get shot. You be a hero, you maybe get shot or you survive. They're all terrible choices, although you've got to make one of them. So own it. Own your choice.
Absolutely. Wow, Dave, that was outstanding. Just loved this. Love the conversation that we had today. And I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with us. And recognizing someone might be a people pleaser can be challenging for them and those around them. But today you've given them so much. I think you've given us so much hope that there's opportunity for us to, and some strategies on how we can avoid that. And so I want to thank you for that, brother, and for everything that you're doing and helping relationships for men and women have more powerful relationships. So what would be the best way that someone could, one of our guests could reach out and get a hold of you, participate in any of your programs or work with you?
The best way is to go to our website, mymilan.com.au, and contact us through the website. There's also our social media page, and it's Milan Coaching and Training. So Milan, like the city, Milan, Milan Coaching and Training, and you'll find us. David Szynski is my actual proper name. So even if you look up David Szynski on Google, you will find me because I come up at the top because it's just how it is. In America, maybe I'll come up third or fourth, but it's still there. So when in doubt, you can just look up, Milan Coaching and Training in Perth, Western Australia.
Love
and just go to our website, mymilan.com.au, and contact us through the website, email us. We have an email. It's the selfawarenessmethod@gmail.com. So it's all one word.
Perfect.
Selfawarenessmethod@gmail.com. You'll talk to Deborah. She does all of the administration and she organises everything. And I work over Zoom. You know, I work internationally as well.
Nice.
And I'm a trainer in this area too. So no problem at all. Just contact us and we'll have a chat.
Love it. I'll make sure I put all that information in the show notes so people can get a chance to reach out to you. Once again, thank you so much, David, for spending time with me today. What a great conversation.
Thank you very much. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.